This actually is not an accurate report of this talk, teaching origins in a public high school science class, and this is significant. I would say you teach about origins in a public high school science class. And with controversial issues, you literally can teach legally most anything, including creation, regardless of what you've heard in the newspapers and stuff like that. Well, I worked at the same high school that I student taught at, and I worked in the same room for 33 years, and know some of the parents of my parent, or their parents and that kind of stuff. Interesting, rather narrow career. But the Lord, I've been a Christian since 8th grade, but the Lord really pointed out creation to me at one time in the late 70s, and it changed my direction in life. I enjoy working with youth, but I realized at that time that it would be, what I should be doing is looking into this creation stuff. So I developed a unit, and much of my career, maybe the first half, I taught basic biology and low-level biology, which we'll mention in a second, things like that. The last 15 years, my school allowed me to write 2 courses. And so in my last 15 years, I had at least 2 of these elective courses, and I'd still teach some biology now and then. But this is an origins unit. I've done it with freshmen, and this one I did with seniors. So let's take a look at it. Origins unit, the seniors that I wrote this class for, I got a little upset that they have AP biology, they have AP this and AP that, but if you're just an average student, science is over for you unless you want to take more. And so I thought, why not teach call it advanced biology class for average high school students. So juniors and seniors took that class. And then, I don't know how that happened either, but last 15 years I also taught oceanography. I never had a course in it, but I really took an interest in it, and it was a lot of fun. And the school allowed me to go to the Bahamas with kids. We went down to Florida. We dove among all the critters and all that stuff. So the Lord has really given me a wonderful job. This first slide up here this is an introduction. This is kind of a short outline. It can be done in many, many ways, but it's a short introduction, and this would be like a 2.5-week unit in evolution and creation. The first study is called Fact or Opinion. If you can read along, it says fact, an actual occurrence event, a piece of information presented as having objective reality. Opinion, a generally held or popular view, a thought out conclusions that is open to dispute. And I got this out of the dictionary. And then here's what the students would read. Students would have to take 2 colored pencils, and seniors actually like using colored pencils and puzzles and different things like that. But their job is to read this article out of their textbook, some of the things that I took out of their textbook, and see whether they knew the difference between a fact or an opinion. So the first one, Class Aves, is right out of their book. Is that a fact or an opinion? Because it's red, it's got to be a fact. Birds can be simply defined as the only organisms with feathers, etc., etc. And then you go down later in this. How did bird flight begin? This is right out of their textbook. One theory holds that birds use their forelimbs at first to stabilize themselves, and then when jumping from branch to branch, and later as parachutes, as in flying lizards and flying squirrels. Another theory holds that birds were bipedal insectivores, running along the ground, catching insects, waving their arms to jump higher after escaping prey. A third theory merges the two. I made a deal with myself if I were going to do a unit on origins, that I would try to be the most honest teacher these students ever have. So I didn't trash evolution from the first day and push creation from the first day. But when we got to this unit, it's usually probably in the middle of the year, the students are used to how things work in my classroom. And so this is what I did. And so I made a deal with myself and God, of course, that when I talked about evolution during this unit, I would not just say this is really stupid, etc. I would give the absolute best evidence that I could find for evolution. So this would be what these children would be hearing. And then for creation, I would give the best evidence for creation that I could, and we'd go from there. Well, a few years ago, and if there's time you can ask me at the end, but I made a videotape with a company that actually does videotapes for the Chicago Bears, and it's called Evolution or Creation, and here's part one of it. Oh, sorry. I should say this too. I went to evolutionists, even my colleagues went to creationists, and I said, this is what these people believe, I think. So you tell me if I'm right or wrong, and I'll put these juxtaposed to each other, so they're sort of opposite at times, but you tell me what's wrong with either one of them. And so these people corrected this, and that's where I came up with that list. And when we made this video, this would go along with the video. And this is exactly what each side believes. We would do the first video, 25 minutes, and it's on the great debate, and that's what the evolutionist says. The next day, you do 25 minutes on creation and what the creationist said. So we have this video. I look a little younger and also lighter. I'm working on it. Here's part one. It's just a 2-minute clip. This video is actually about a 51-minute clip, and we sold them to high schools, churches, private schools, whatever.
The issue today is evolution versus creation. And what you're about to see is a simulation of a debate that is going on throughout this country right now. Professor Evolution has won the coin toss and has elected to go first. So, Professor Evolution, take it away. Thank you. First of all, let me say this, that by my very presence up here, you will think that I am debating on equal terms with the creationists, when that is not true at all. I don't particularly like being on the same platform with a creationist arguing science versus his religion. But if I didn't show up, I would be accused of not having answers. And so I choose to show up and argue, but I'm hoping that you will not be misled. These are equal arguments because they're not. Creation is religion thinly disguised as science, and I don't think it should ever be taught in public school science classes. If we set a precedent by teaching creationism in science class, why don't we teach astrology along with astronomy, or witchcraft in health class? Or for that matter, during the sex ed unit, why don't we teach kids that the stork brings babies? Or in geography, why don't we still teach about a flat earth? I think that at the time to every half-baked pseudoscientific idea that comes down the pike, the kids will lose out academically, and we waste valuable time on issues that could be used better in scientific matters. Incidentally, I'm not an atheist. I have some very deep personal feelings about God. However, this is supposed to be a discussion on science. And I prefer religion to be a private matter, so I will not mention them. In conclusion, we feel that it is obvious that evolution took place in the past and that evolution is taking place now. In reality, evolution is the only scientific, and I emphasize scientific theory, to origin and development of life on planet Earth and elsewhere in the universe for that matter. Thank you.
Where did Mondy get these arguments? Going to debates and reading evolutionists or what they say. And so the students would fill out the Great Debate Part 1, which is is from Professor Evolution. It's about 25 minutes. And then they would answer questions such as, why does Professor Evolution think it's bad for him to be up on stage debating a creationist? The student should have an answer for that. Why then does he choose to show up and debate? And it's just exactly, he gives answers for all of these. And when we're done, because there's 25 minutes, you can actually sit down with your students and actually go over these and say, is that really what he said? And it's pretty straightforward, so they generally say, yeah, that is pretty much. Then for homework, I just took their arms in camp biology, and the first sheet, Evolution and Natural Science, you can read it there, but it's very typical things that you would find in a senior average biology class about evolution, and you still hear some of those things today. On the bottom of the first one, I have a note to my students. Throughout this unit on origins, you'll be presented with evidence that an author feels supports his or her belief in evolution or creation. Your job is to be a critical thinker. Does the evidence support the author's claims? Are there other ways to interpret this evidence? What do you believe about the information presented? And the next day they walk in, they're not asleep yet, but it's time for the great debate, part 2.
Our next debater, Dr. Terrence Creation, has also had a distinguished career in education. He too did his undergraduate work at the University of Illinois, where he graduated with high honors with distinction in the curriculum. Dr. Creation? It's interesting that the only degree Charles Darwin, the father of modern evolutionary theory, had was in theology, not science. Yet the evolutionists cry foul, claiming that evolution is purely science, while creation is purely religious. The evolutionists like to set up a smokescreen and call creationists religious fanatics. Yet how much religious faith do you think it takes to believe that the universe, complex living thing in it, just happens solely by time and chance? Now I ask you, a reasonable, logical, scientific conclusion? I don't think so. Evolutionists know their theory is in big trouble, but rather than facing up to the total bankruptcy of their ideas, they prefer to censor anyone who has an opposing ideas. Censorship of the opposition, you see, is so much easier than defending their own theory. We feel that a close examination of the actual observed scientific evidence is best explained by the creationist model. There is virtually no evidence that living things come from non-living things. Now, I would like to ask Mr. Evolution a question. Is there any experimental evidence from anywhere in the world at any time in history that shows a living thing coming from a non-living thing? And the evolutionists talk about creationists being religious fanatics, yet they believe purely by faith that living things arose from non-living things when there's absolutely no evidence for it.
Now, that debate came about. I used to do this for my students. You probably notice it's all me. You know, what's interesting is many of my students didn't know I was all three of those people. But what was neat about it is that they kind of got into it, and then they would be asked questions such as, what is the only degree Charles Darwin, the father of modern evolution, had? Yeah, and now I didn't give a lot of evidence on either side, and I tried to give the same amount of time. So I didn't give a lot of arguments on either side, but if you saw this entire presentation, there's plenty of science explained in evolution, plenty of things science explained in creation. And then you may have heard back that time of Pandas and People was a book written by creationists, or it's actually a creation book, but it's for intelligent design groups and the origins of life. So we would take Pandas and People, they would work through this, and then when they're done, and when I had a complete set in my classroom, we would go over these with the students, and you can explain things by doing that with them. Then, my school district gave me permission and tickets to go to Mount St. Helens and spend a week there, go to Churchill, Canada, and study polar bears, go to Biloxi, Texas, and study human and animal footprints. And their only thing to me was, if you can develop a balanced approach to this, we'll put it in all of our 8 high schools. So I wrote these for them, and what a nice time that was. Now, here's 2 crossword puzzles. They're not super difficult, but let's see if we can do one together. Now, there's a word bank on the bottom. Evolutionists believe that one of the main ingredients of evolution is time. The other is? Rhymes with dance. Yes. Okay, and then here's another one. Evolutionists believe this may be a major mechanism which causes populations to evolve. 2 words. Natural selection. Now you're saying to me, Monday, this isn't kindergarten. I mean, you got a word bank on there. And the reason I did is many of these terms were unknown to my students until they came into my class. So they had a word bank they could pick from. They could work with each other to get the answers to these crossword puzzles. And then they got credit after they brought their completed puzzle. It's time for your oral quiz. So they'd come up to me and I could ask them any one of these, any 3-4 questions on the crossword puzzle. If they got them all in a row, they'd pass. If they didn't, they'd have to go back and sit down and try it again. One thing, it might sound a little odd, but you know that some of your students are deeper thinkers or have different interests and stuff. If I had a kid who was really struggling in class, I wouldn't ask him, you know, all the tenets of evolution or something. I would ask him things that I think he could do, try to stretch their brain a little bit. And so they had to have a quiz on both of these puzzles, and they got credit for it, not by doing it, but for knowing the answers on it. Well, how about a lab? And now when I'm talking, they say, yeah, you're a fossil yourself. Anyway, here's a lab. The pictures on here were done by my sister-in-law. She was an art major, and they look okay. It says, fossils have been the subject of scientific investigation for many years because they provide valuable clues to life in the past as well as present-day life. Fossils not only yield information about organisms that no longer exist, they also record many life forms identical to those we see today. Many fossils are found in sedimentary rock that has been deposited as a result of material settling out of water. Limestone and sandstone are examples of sedimentary rock. Scientists generally agree that sedimentary fossils were most likely formed, regardless of what side you're on, when plants and animals were rapidly buried by water and debris. In this lab, we'll work with several fossil types. So making a cast, I just got these little plastic things. They're sort of like Legos, but they're different critters like a shark tooth and fossils and all that kind of stuff. So that is the pattern that they're going to use. And then they get clay, Seniors play with clay. I let them play with glow-in-the-dark stuff. They crush that in there, wait and pull them out. And then you can see there's the mold fossil. So if they see a fossil in life or on TV, that's a mold fossil. And if they see what the actual thing was shaped like, that's a cast fossil. Then I thought this was so cool, and it's literally 50 years ago. In my education at the University of Illinois, we used coal balls. And you can find them in coal seams, especially in coal mines. And the coal companies just throw them out as a pile outside of the mine because they're not valuable for coal. But they're absolute treasure trove of organisms that were once alive and were captured by this coal ball. So how do you do this? Before this first slide, you take some grit and sand the face of the coal ball and then hold it in a weak solution of hydrochloric acid. Then clean it off and you go to this step. And that is, you take some acetone and take an acetate sheet. And so you can stick that to the coal ball. And then you can peel that off. You wait a few minutes. And when I saw this in college, I thought, that is really cool. And you know what? The Illinois Geological Survey has these. You can get them free. I haven't looked this time out. But here's what you can see under the microscope. Now, do I know what these things are? No, I'm not an expert. But you can talk about what you can see, cell structure, you can identify, and the people who studies these things in the class that I took really have an idea of what they're looking at, and they can actually determine the 3D shape of some of these organisms. There's many questions along the way, but here's three. If sedimentary fossils are laid down underwater, what must be true about the Swiss Alps, which contain fossils? Yeah. How would a creationist explain how the Swiss Alps deposits got there? Flood. How would an evolutionist explain these deposits of sedimentary rocks? Rapid sediment out of water many times over millions of years. We'd watched several videos, and the way this video got made that I first showed you, I used to do this in my classroom, and I was asked to do it at Abbott Labs one time, and my AV director said, you got to put this on film. And I thought, nah. And I went home, and I got a call from a school board in Michigan that said, we'd like another one of your great debate videos. And I said, what? Someone had filmed me somewhere, and they were selling them, which is okay by me. They're spreading the message, but I thought, maybe the AV director's right. So I partnered with a Christian film company to do that. Well, you then would work with arms and camp biology, textbook of pandas and people, etc. Different things you can talk about. I don't like kids to just do worksheets and then you never talk about them. You're not punished for getting the wrong answer if you tried, but we can discuss it so you understand why that was incorrect or why it wasn't or was correct. And then comes the exam. Oh, this is so hard. Here's how you can test it, and I'm sure there are many ways to do it. Here's the origins exam. Who would agree with the following statements below? Evolutionists, creationists, both evolutionists and creationists, neither evolutionists nor creationists. So let's take a look. The Earth is probably more than 4 billion years old. Who would agree with that? Rhymes with mevolution, yeah. I had to help them in the beginning. Okay, no new life forms are now appearing. Life forms are basically complete, and the world of life is in a struggle to conserve species. Creation. Sedimentary rock is layered rock that was laid down underwater. Both. And some of you will have trouble, maybe irritated. It's possible to prove scientifically once and for all that creation or evolution took place. Neither of them. If you really press someone, I wasn't there at the creation. I know I look fairly old, but I'm not that old. So there's things that they can agree on, there's things that they can't. And then what if you did a matching kind of thing? There's your list on the right. Theory that says life was created as we know it and its complexity points to a designer. So then you'd find that. And I had electronic answer sheets so I could just run these through a machine. The father of modern evolutionary theory. Yeah, and by the way, I really think Darwin was a genius. I think he's happened to be wrong, but if you read particularly The Voyage of the Beagle that he wrote, this 5-year trip down to the Galapagos Islands and stuff, he was a very good writer, very interesting writer. Published in 1859, this book popularized evolution. Origin of species, so that's how that goes. Things in the universe tend to go from order to disorder. Second law of thermodynamics, Mr. Mondy. Okay, thermodynamics. How about true or false? There's no gradual series of fossils leading from one group of organisms to another. Is that true or false? It's true. Stasis is a characteristic of the fossil record where one kind of organism is seen to gradually turn into another type of organism. It's just the opposite, so it's false. Punctuated equilibrium, which was by a Harvard professor. Punctuated equilibrium is a theory of evolution that tries to account for the gaps in the fossil record and lack of intermediate fossil forms. And that was by Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge who did that. And it's true that that is a theory of evolution. What were the statistics? Now, I truly, you'll have to believe me on this one, I truly did not want to know what my students believed. I wouldn't argue with them if they didn't agree what I believe. I wanted them to know when they were listening to one argument or another who they were listening to. And that wasn't my job beyond that point. But so over a period of 20-some years, I did statistics. I took a poll before the unit and then a poll after the unit, and here are the results. Now, before the unit, evolutionists and creationists, about 50% of the students on average believed in either one of those. That might surprise you, but we don't talk about it too much in public school, so they wouldn't know that. How about after this 3-week unit, and you're just going to have to trust me that I did not try to influence them. Some years they would ask me what I believe at the end of the unit, I would tell them. If they didn't ask me, I wouldn't tell them. Afterwards, evolution 5%, creation 95%. And I had kids write me from the University of Illinois and say, hey, Mr. Monday, they don't teach creation here. You know, what's going on? Well, I'm of the theory, even when you allow incorrect things to be taught, such as, I don't know, some things that we're talking about now, maybe climate change or one of those kind of things. It's okay to hear all the evidence for a bad argument. And if they think it's bad, okay. If they don't, they'll maybe learn somewhere else. But it turned out that students actually, at about a 95% rate for 20 years, thought that creation made more sense to them based on the evidence. Now, the court case that never was, this was alluded to, and I was merrily going along. This looks like water. Anyway, the story, the court case that never was. One day I was in the teacher's office and I got a phone call from a group called ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. And I'll tell you my reactions in a minute. Here's the main question they wanted to know. Do you teach creation science in your public school classroom? And here's how they worked. They contacted my principal, district superintendent, and me, gave conflicting statements and threats to each of us, tried to put us against one another, asked to see my origins curriculum, and by the way, which I sent them. I now know that Illinois has a law that you don't have to show educational materials to outside groups. But I sent it to them anyway, because I knew nothing about this. Wanted me to admit I taught something called creation science in my science classes. So what was the response? Me. I was scared to death. I came home and said, "You're not going to believe this, but have you heard of the ACLU? They said I'm in big trouble and they're going to make my life miserable." I turned over my origins curriculum to the ACLU, did what they said. I prayed regularly and asked God to get me through this. My principal, he was a Christian man, nice man, he said, "I'll support you as much as I can." The superintendent said this, "Stop teaching the origins unit for a while until this blows over. The district may have to hire a lawyer. Why is this such a big deal to you?" And so I had a meeting with him in his office, and he said, "Why are you doing this? I mean, you could really lose your job, and who knows what's going to happen." And I said, "Have you ever known me to be insubordinate?" And he was my vice principal for 10 years at my high school. So I said, "Have you ever known me to disobey orders or be insubordinate?" He said, "No." And as a matter of fact, I think this is a God thing because he knows the future. I was in Steve's office, that's the superintendent, when he was my vice principal. We're having a conversation, and I said to him, this was 10 years before this ACLU thing came up. I said to him, "You don't have to make me do stuff, but is there something you would like me to do or not do that I don't have to obey, but you really would like me to do it?" And he said, "Yeah, you know what?" This is back in the early 80s. He said, "Yeah, I think it's very unprofessional for teachers to wear jeans and look like a prisoner." And I said, "Steve, as long as you are my vice principal, I will never wear jeans to this school again. Never." What kind of effect did you think that had on him 10 years later when I asked him about submitting to authority? My family and friends, very supportive. "Are you nuts?" One of them, I think, was my mother's, wonderful Christian lady wanting to help her boy. "You could lose your job." That was going through my mind every time I said anything in a Christian way to a class. You know, I take this step, I'm going to get fired. Take that step, and you kind of get used to it and just go, "Well, you could lose your job. Yeah, that's a possibility. Good luck, we'll be praying for you." And they were, and they're Christian friends and colleagues that were very kind to me. Our strategy was this. I got my own counsel. I was advised that if the district had a lawyer, it's not that they're evil or mean, but that lawyer would look out for the interests of the district, not you. And so I got my own counsel. You may have heard of the Rutherford Institute with John Whitehead. I talked to him on the phone. He was in Washington, D.C. He says, "Monday, all you have to do is keep teaching what you're teaching. Don't get in any of these arguments. Just keep doing what you're doing." And then here's an amazing coincidence, I would say. 4 doors down from me where I lived, a family moved in a year before all this came up. And the family that lived there was the president of Student Action for Christ. And so I told him about this, and I got involved in his ministry, writing things and all that kind of stuff. He says, "I'll be your counselor." I said, "You don't have a law degree." He says, "You don't need a law degree. You need someone who knows what they're doing." So I said, "Okay." So I went to the meetings. I just said to the people, "This is my counsel, Dan Rodden." And so they took it with that. Our question to the ACLU, could you define creation science for us? We will then let you know whether Mr. Mondy teaches creation science or not. He has 2 degrees from 2 secular universities. He doesn't have a degree in theology. As far as he is concerned, he teaches science. He's only educated in science. What happened? This lasted 3 years, and I can honestly say it's really nice to stand up here and go, yeah, I just really told them. I was scared stiff, and I would wake up sometimes in a cold sweat and thinking, am I really supposed to do this? But these ministry guys said, this could be a landmark case, because you're not doing anything wrong, we don't think. So after 3 years, the ACLU left me alone. I never heard from them again. My principal, wonderful man, he was pleased that things worked out. The superintendent, always supportive and respectful. Remember, he's the guy who would give permission to go on all these neat trips. Me, thank God and all those who supported me, and taught an origins unit until the day I retired in 2002 for more than 20 years. You could do this today. That's not illegal. Here's some teacher tips. Do not go into, Realize that all education is religious. Most Christians, and that was me, think I'm being neutral in the classroom. I don't mention religion, and that's for some other place, and so I'm being neutral. There are 2 points of view in education. One is atheism. You can teach from that point of view, or the other is theism. You can teach from that point of view, and you can say to yourself, make it a point to teach from a theistic worldview, such as evolutionists say this organism was adapted to live at great depths in the ocean. You can say this organism was designed to live at great depths in the ocean. And so when you watch Nova and all those things, and I'm not pushing this stuff on kids, I'm just telling them, you got to think about this a little bit. Design versus adapted. Design your lessons to include historical Christian conservative figures. Francis Bacon, all these guys, Johannes Kepler, George Washington Carver, one of my favorites. And there are literally dozens of these. And there are also current scientists out there, like Raymond Damadian, who invented the MRI machine. Why didn't he get the Nobel Prize? Because he was a creationist, and they told him so. Invite members of your administration to visit when you have an especially good activity in class. Like, hey, we're working with leeches today. They're always kind of fun. Come on into class. And you know how hard it is to get a leech to suck on your hand? It's super hard to do. And so, you know, some kids are going, I'm going to die. He's going to drink all my blood and all that. Well, that's what makes stuff interesting. Then you can talk about this group of animals. But these kids, I gave them extra credit if they could get one to hang on various parts of their body. And we just had a lot of fun with it. I really worked at having to get these do that. Take a personal interest in your students. In other words, a minute or two before and after class are the valuable times to interact with your students. In other words, how's your dad doing? I know he was sick. Thanks for telling me. I'm praying for him. Also, I met a 15-year-old boy from India in the hallway who didn't have a father, and I still have lunch with him about once a month, and he is now 37. So I met this kid in the hallway, very needy, very hurting boy, and we've had an interesting relationship, and I've got to know a lot about Hinduism, and I presented the gospel to him, and you can talk to me about that afterwards. Well, fireside chats, that's what FDR did during World War II. He'd, sit down, once a week, or I shouldn't say that, at the beginning of a unit, or every other week, I would have a fireside chat with my students. And I would say to this, I'm going to give you some advice. You don't have to follow it at all, but here it is. How to get organized and get better grades. What do you have to do? How to be popular. Wouldn't you want to know that if you're a high school kid? Are you a liar? And we also talked about forgiveness. Most adults don't know how to ask forgiveness or give it. And so I would just talk to them about it. And I'd had kids come in and say, man, after lunch, I forgave that kid and we're friends again. So there's just real things that you can do like that. And then this one, why every American high school student should read the Bible before he or she graduates. The American Association of English Teachers recommends that every senior should have read this Bible because it's the basis for our law, our art, our English, almost everything in our society. And I had a real low-level class, and I sat down and I whipped out the Bible and I said, this is what I think about it. In fact, it's so valuable to me that I spend a lot of time in it. It gives me good advice. You can do what you want, but this is something good for you. The summer came, and a student came back. The student was a freshman in my behavior disordered class, and he came back and he said, I started reading the Bible. And he said, I became a Christian. I said, that's pretty neat. Well, he was my lab assistant the next 3 years, sophomore, junior, senior. We could, mentor him or whatever. But get this, you won't believe this because it was hard for me to believe. He went on to become a YWAM missionary. And he went over to Japan and married a Japanese girl and learned how to speak fluent Japanese. Here's a behavior disordered, troubled person. We kept in touch with him for quite some time. I haven't seen him lately. How about complaints? In over 20 years, one Bible was returned. Let's see, did I do this right? Oh, speaking of Bibles, send your senior students a graduation gift. How about sending them the Bible? Except this isn't the way to send it. Send your former senior students a graduation gift. So I had a deal with a Christian bookstore guy, and he would get me Bibles at a pretty reasonable price, and I'd give him time at the beginning of each semester to engrave the names on each Bible, and I had them ready to go by the end of the school year. And the day after school was out, are they my students anymore? Rhymes with row. No. So whether someone gets bent out of shape or whatever, it really is not illegal to do that. So I sent them Bibles. So you just put them in an envelope, a carbon copy to the ACLU, and then you put it in the mailbox. And what about complaints? I didn't know what was going to happen. In 22 years, I think I did this, I had one Bible returned by a Jewish parent with a very angry letter in it. And so my principal, who was a different person at that time, very liberal, super nice lady, not a Christian, she called me at home. She says, Terry, are you giving kids Bibles? I said, yeah. She says, why? I said, well, they're not my students anymore, and the Bible is the basis for our culture. They need this to understand our history, our art, all different things. And so I give them out. And my principal said, yeah, I can handle that. Really? I mean, I think I'm not trying to be Mr. Christian. It's just, you got to try it. Give it a shot, see what happens. And then this bookmark is, I borrowed the idea anyway from the Gideons. If you go into a hotel, you have open the book and it says what to read. I can read it here better. If you're tired, worried, discouraged, whatever, angry with someone, look this up. And so they had a Bible with them that they could look it up. And so I'm going to tell you about Juan, who was a senior in a sophomore physical science class of mine. He was a gang guy, tough guy, nice guy. And I knew at the end of the semester, he's possibly going to prison for robbing a McDonald's. Maybe it'd be someone else or whatever. But so I sent a Bible to his house. He was a senior, even though he's a sophomore in my class. Sitting at my hall duty 2 years later, true story. Hall duty is where teachers check for passes and make sure that students are where they should be, etc. The door opens in my hallway, and this guy runs up to me and throws his arms around me and says, "Mr. Mondy, do you remember me?" And I said, "I think so, aren't you Juan?" He says, "Yeah, that was me." Well, when I got out of school right after that, I had a tumor between my breastbone and my heart. And it was really serious. And he said, I didn't know what to do about it at all. So I was in the hospital, and my mother brought me the Bible that you sent her, and I read some of these things in there, and talking with other people, I've become a born-again Christian. And I want to have a ministry to gang types and, that type that I understand their culture. I want to be a missionary to them. Wouldn't that be a good reason to send a Bible? How about Facebook? This just happened last month, and it's embarrassing for me to read this, but I think God gave me this to show you. This guy named Michael was a student of mine more than 20 years ago, and he sent this on May 5th of this year. Cameron on the bass playing special music at church tonight, and he wasn't a Christian when I had him. So I wrote back on his timeline, "What a blessing for me to see your family involved in a gospel-preaching church. Thanks for sharing." Here's what he wrote back, with one misspelling. "Terry Monday, you have a part in this. If it wasn't for you choosing to teach creation and being a godly example in the school system and sending me a Bible after I graduated, I might never have been interested enough to investigate the gospel. Thank you." And he's a Christian, his children are Christians. What did we learn today? Nothing, it's over. No. As a public school teacher, view your job as a ministry. In other words, and in fact, if you're not a public school teacher and you still go to work, view your job as a ministry. And you ask God to give you a strategy to reach your part of the battlefield that the Lord has given you. You don't have to, witness to the whole world or get on TV or whatever, but how to do that. We learned about all education is religious. Teach from a theistic point of view. Take a personal interest in your students. Be known as a caring, hardworking person. Invite your administrators and colleagues into your classroom. Why is that good? Teachers are unsung heroes. They could be doing the greatest stuff and no one ever knows about it. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to be one-dimensional. So I'm going to have a really cool thing like leeches, or we had these glow-in-the-dark little sea critters and all that kind of stuff. I'd invite the administration in, or my colleagues, say, "This is really cool. You want to see how this is?" So when this stuff came up, and I didn't think ACLU would come up, but I had a track record of not one dimension. They thought, this guy knows how to teach this course. And so they get a different view of me other than he's a religious fanatic. It is possible to legally teach controversial issues in a public school classroom. Here's some final thoughts. Terry Monday is delusional. And you're saying to yourself, you could never do what he's telling us to do in our current public schools. And you know what? That's what I told myself 40 years ago. I can't bring Christ into the classroom in the condition the schools are in. And remember, we were doing all that sensitivity training and all that kind of stuff. It isn't, the school is way off. If a person is not a Christian, they're literally going to hell. And I don't mean that in a mean way. It just is reality, in my reality anyway. And I would really get in trouble if I tried this in my classes. That's another thing you could say to yourself. You know that's possible. It's painful sometimes, I got told off in front of my class by a colleague. That was kind of painful. I'd go into the faculty lounge this one semester, and these women's table, I'd walk by and they go, "Aren't you just sick of these Bible-beating Christians? They're so nauseating, blah, blah, blah," you know. Now, is that persecution? No. Having your head cut off in Sudan is, you know, that's persecution. Because people say mean things to you is not persecution, and you can know maybe you're having an effect on these people because they're angry at you. I'll tell you the story about the three women, and then we'll finish. Three women would sit at the table, and I had a Bible club before school in the morning. Can you have Bible clubs in a school? Yes, and the ruling is if they have any other student club, you can legally have a Bible club. Now, the only thing you must do is let the students lead it. And they might pick someone to come in and talk, or who knows what. But we had sometimes 40 kids doing that. And so I'd walk into the lunchroom, and these three teachers were all sitting there and saying all these mean things. And I heard that one of them, all three of them had illnesses. And I heard that one had a really terrible illness, and they had to take something out in her neck and a thyroid. And I said, if we're to be compassionate as Christians, we need to write some cards to this lady that we're praying for her. And if you see these people, and we named them, open the door for them. You be real meek. That's it. You don't have to try to explain anything or whatever. Fast forward 2 years. Two of those teachers, one was transferred out. The other one had such a serious illness that she had to quit. It was some type of arthritis or whatever. The third one transferred out. So about 5 years later, I was going into Willow Creek to see a concert there with my wife. And I hear, as I'm coming in the audience, "Terry Mondy, come here a minute." And I thought, oh, that's that teacher. She says, "You won't believe what happened to me. I found Christ, and I've become a Christian, and now I understand what it's all about." And so it isn't always horrible. And there are temporal and eternal benefits. It's wonderful to get an email like that from that kid. I took a kid to the Bahamas who was on drugs and really messed up, and I promised his mother, who went to Willow Creek, this kid I don't believe was a Christian, that under certain circumstances I would allow him to go with us, even though he's a real questionable character. If you get into drugs, like on the island of Eleuthera or something, they throw away the key. So we did have some issues with him, but over the years I've run into him, and he knows the word. I don't know if he's a Christian yet, but I had a real good opportunity on the island there with him. One last story. Oops. Okay, one last story, over and over and over again. National Association of Biology Teachers. They're one of the most high-profile organizations in education that hate creationists. And they think they are evil and shouldn't be in a classroom, meaning me. And so I was up for the Illinois Biology Teacher of the Year in 1991, and the committee came to my school. I can still do that. I'm 75 years old. Anyway, the committee came to my school, and one of the people on the committee said, "Do you believe in creation?" I said, "Yeah, I do. I believe in six-day literal creation, and I teach science." And he said to me, "You know that disqualifies you from getting this award, don't you?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to change my beliefs for one award." It was kind of painful because I thought I was doing an okay job. That was 1991. Fast forward to 1999. I was up for this award again. The same group from NABT came to my school. He said, "Do you teach creation?" I said, "Yeah." And the guy said, "You know what? You're such a good teacher, we're going to give it to you anyway." Do you think that's a God thing? Yes. It's not because I'm a wonderful teacher. I want to be able to tell stories like this to you, and you can make your own life stories like that. Well, it's time to go, so why don't I close in prayer? Father, thank you for giving me a ministry when I'm an old geezer. Thank you for all the blessings and even the rough spots you brought us through. I pray that everyone in here would be impacted in their own way as to how they can live their life from this day forward, whether they're a teacher or in any other job or whatever. We thank you for this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.